Europe is the target of a brutal Islamic jihad, and our elected representatives want to do nothing more than synchronously sit on their hands, cover their ears, and shout relentlessly, "Not all Muslims." Meanwhile, hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent European citizens are being murdered, maimed, and raped in the name of an oppressive, tyrannical, and increasingly competent enemy whose only wish is to destroy the infidel. Since the 2004 Madrid bombing, there have been 8 successful Islamist atrocities carried out in Europe alone. It's time for the European progressive left to stop worrying about the feelings of Europe's moderate Muslims and start to act against the threats we face. For example, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, believes that terrorism is now part and parcel of living in a metropolitan capital city. Well, I'm sorry, Sadiq, but I don't believe that the residents of these cities should have to put up with the threat of terrorism at any given moment. Or what about the hypocrisy of Frau Merkel, whom in the same sentence will assert Islam has nothing to do with Islamist terror, and then beg moderate imams and clerics to speak out against Muslim extremism? But it's not just politicians. The bombing of Manchester will be repeated time and time again throughout Europe until the mainstream media, celebrity hacks, and journalists end the incessant race to the lowest common denominator in this situation. Islam is a religion of peace. Until we can have an open dialogue on the ideas within the doctrine of Islam and demystify the barbarous passages within its texts, this will continue. Ben Affleck really demonstrates how these arguments are shut down by virtue signalling apologetics and the unwavering conflation of the ideology of Islam with Muslims. I'm going to play the clip from 2014 between Sam Harris and Ben Affleck on the Bill Maher show. But before I do, I just want to highlight that I've edited this down, but I believe that the points are all still as intended.
But when you want to talk about the treatment of women and homosexuals and free thinkers and public intellectuals in the Muslim world, I would argue that liberals have failed us. And every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous.
Okay, so Sam Harris has made a couple of arguments against the liberal idea of criticising Islam. And this is where it gets interesting. Just watch Ben Affleck's reaction.
So even it gets
So hold on, are you
racist.
the person who understands the officially codified doctrine of Islam? You're the interpreter of that, so you can say, well, this is...
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
I'm asking you. So you're saying if I criticize you're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing.
Here, Ben is misrepresenting Sam with 2 logical fallacies. The first one being a reverse argument for authority, claiming Sam does not have the knowledge necessary to speak on a subject. We also have a strawman argument. Ben claiming that Sam doesn't believe Islamophobia is a real thing. And now we have this strawman argument. It sets up Ben Affleck to say this.
But
why are you so hostile about this? It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so not.
It's like saying those stateless, shifty Jew.
You're not.
Having watched this a few times, I genuinely can't tell whether Ben is actually being disingenuous or just completely ignorant on the subject. In Sam's own words, the idea that criticism of an idea is racist is just ridiculous.
No.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad
ideas. But Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So we have...
Ben literally cannot separate a Muslim from the religion of Islam. And this is, in essence, the problem with left-wing thinking on the Islamist problem. And until people like Ben and political elites actually come to terms with the fact that Muslims and Islam are 2 separate identities, the conversation will never progress.
Or how about the more than 1 billion people who aren't fanatical, who don't punish women, who just want to go to the store,
wait a second.
sandwiches,
Wait a
25
second.
times a day,
Right.
and
Wait a
don't do
second.
any of the things that you're saying all Muslims.
Wait a second.
Stereotyping.
Wait
You
a
take bad
second.
things and you painting the whole group religion with that. same brush.
Please watch the original video and tell me that Sam is actually painting an entire religion with the same brush. And now Sam Harris is going to try to move the conversation forward and have a reasoned debate on the problem of extremism within Islam. But unfortunately now Ben Affleck has virtue signalled his love and support for all Muslims. It gives license for other panellists to do just the same.
Just imagine some concentric circles here. You have at the center, you have jihadists. These are people who wake up in the morning wanting to kill apostates, wanting to die trying. They believe in paradise. They believe in martyrdom. Outside of them, we have Islamists. These are people who are just as convinced of martyrdom and paradise and wanting to foist their religion on the rest of humanity, but they want to work within the system. They're not going to blow themselves up on a bus. They want to change governments. They want to use democracy against itself. Those two circles arguably are 20% of the Muslim world. Okay, this is not the fringe of the fringe.
What are you basing that research on?
A bunch of poll results that we can talk about. So to give you one point of contact, 78% of British Muslims think that the Danish cartoonist should have been prosecuted. 78%. So I'm being conservative when I roll this back to 20%. But outside of that circle, you have conservative Muslims who can honestly look at ISIS and say that does not represent us, that we're horrified by that, but they hold views about human rights and about women, about homosexuals that are deeply troubling. So these are not Islamists, they're not jihadists, but
those views are anathema to ours.
But they also keep women and homosexuals immiserated in these cultures, and we have to empower the true reformers in the Muslim world to change it. And lying about the link between doctrine and behavior is not going to do that.
So we've heard some good evidence that a significant portion of Muslims either support or will be willing to carry out terrorist acts around the world, a global jihad, as is mentioned in the video. Just watch the reaction from the other panel member.
But this is such a caricature of Indonesia, of Malaysia, so much of the world. And this does have the tinge a little bit of the way white racists talk about African Americans and define blacks by
what you're saying is because criminals.
And there you have it. There are black criminals, therefore all blacks are criminals. There are Muslim terrorists, therefore all Muslims are terrorists. This logic just does not follow, and Sam at no point in this video has even stated such a thing, and yet these people are allowed to get away with it, to continue the mantra of Islam is peaceful, Muslims are not terrorists, it's just a minority. It's hashtag not all Muslims, when it's simply not true. The overwhelming majority of terrorist attacks in Europe over the past 4 or 5 years have been as a result of Islamist extremism. Nobody is blaming all Muslims. Nobody is stating all Muslims are terrorists. No one actually believes that these racist connotations hold any truth. Move on a few years to the past few weeks, and the arguments expressed by Affleck, whom represents the liberal Western zeitgeist extraordinarily well, are still being thrown around the mainstream media. The difference now is jihadi attacks on the West have rapidly increased in rate and ferocity. The Manchester concert bomb is the latest in a string of attacks in Europe since Ben Affleck's remarks. But now let's have a look at the Young Turks' response to the Manchester bombing and see if we can't spot any similarities in the narrative as portrayed by Ben Affleck.
You may be familiar with this image. It's often seen across social media after a high-profile terror attack with the go-to caption of "Wake up" or "Step up." But I see a different cycle, and I believe a more dangerous one.
You mean more dangerous than a bomb that killed 22 and injured just short of 60 people? But straight away we can see the narrative that's being portrayed. Anyone that criticises Islam is blaming all Muslims. Anyone that is trying to call for action against these people are accused of blaming all Muslims and therefore being racist.
One that replaces terms with blame all Muslims, calls for more innocent bloodshed, and then patiently wait for next attack to exploit for hate-filled political agenda.
And this is an extension of the narrative of blame all Muslims. Anyone who criticises Islam obviously wants innocent Muslims abroad to be killed in retaliation to any kind of terrorist attack at home. Then obviously we need to wait for future terrorist attacks to exploit this narrative. And once that terror attack strikes, we can blame all Muslims once more. This is simply not the case. As already stated, nobody is blaming all Muslims.
Because with each heinous, vile attack that occurs, the time hate-filled trolls wait to exploit innocent deaths to assert their political narrative shortens. What is it now? 10 seconds? 15 seconds after, when political mudslinging clouds the space?
Maybe they're sick of the fellow citizens of their country dying at the hands of dangerous terrorists. Maybe, just maybe, they want our politicians to act instead of sitting on their hands and waiting for the next act of terror.
What are these people stating we need to wake up want? Do they want more of the same mass hate-mongering that drove wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that birthed ISIS in the first place?
They want us to act. They want us to actively try and stop these people killing our citizens. And let's not forget that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were against the Taliban, Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. Not the kind of people that you want to make friends with, are they?
I get to call you out for being an opportunist who won't even wait until the bodies are counted to demand more violence, more bigotry and more suffering.
And just like Ben Affleck, there it is. More bigotry. Accusations of racism against people who want actions against terrorism. But Maxwell is just one of millions who are stuck in this righteous Islamophilic conviction. Critics of Islam do not just seek mindless condemnation of the act, yet everywhere the left wing will be labelling yet another jihadi terrorist as a fringe lunatic, whilst going to the defence of the native Islamic population, wailing aimlessly, "Not all Muslims, not all Muslims." The same Muslims whom refuse to acknowledge Islam as the inspiration behind these atrocities. A prominent Muslim in British politics will release a statement condemning the attacks and stating that the attacker was not a Muslim. There will be a peace march and probably a candlelit midnight vigil. Tall buildings in capital cities around the world will light up in the colours of the Union Jack to show solidarity. Eventually, videos will go viral online of the few mindless apes who do commit acts of racist abuse after 12 cans of Stella on the way home whilst on a tube or bus. The left will decry this in a moral outrage that Islamophobia is massively on the rise as a result of the attack, and then lump critics of political Islam into the same pot as the racist abusers. What we need is to end this victim narrative. The people who are seeking to destroy us are not victims. The ideology they follow and doctrines they are bound by do not subscribe to the peace and harmony view being repeated at a sycophantic rate by the mainstream media, the liberal left and politicians. They need to wake up and act against the enemies at our gates.
God damn these gays, they're all trying to eat each other.